Yeah, in order to hear, you probably need to wear it. Yeah. So, can everyone hear me on their headsets? You need to put your headsets on first for you to test and see if it works. Natasha, does it work? Kate? Good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lloyd Day. I'm the Deputy Director General of ICA. Welcome to the last day of the COP. It's been a journey, as it always is, but it's been I think, a rewarding journey for all of us to be here to talk about agriculture and to talk about agriculture as part of the solution to climate change. Now, I'm going to start out with some bad news, but hopefully this panel can turn it into good news. So just this morning, I received a notice from the COP29 presidency saying food production is a major driver of climate change, generating more greenhouse gas emissions than all forms of transport combined. Meat production is a leading contributor, but land use also plays a significant role. Creating farmland often involves deforestation, reducing the planet's ability to absorb CO2 and exacerbating climate change. So, the governments of the Americas, the president of our Inter-American Board of Agriculture is deeply upset by this statement. Governments are going to be requesting that the presidency take this down. But no matter what happens, I think this demonstrates that we still have a lot of work to do to explain how important agriculture is as part of the solution to climate change and promote all the good things that are happening in agriculture in order to sequester carbon, to reduce emissions, to grow more with less. And I think that's going to be the subject or part of the subject of this panel. We want to thank our partners at Bayer for sponsoring this panel. They've been a longtime friend and ally of IEC, and we're very grateful for your work with us, and we're also grateful for the work that you do on behalf of farmers and ranchers everywhere. So, muito obrigado to my Brazilian friends from Bayer, and I'm going to pass the moderation of this panel over to Danush. I thought it was Danush. Danush, I'm right. Okay. I'm going to pass it over to Danush, the CEO of Climate. Danush, welcome.
Thank you, Lloyd. And thanks to all of you who have joined us here today, showing so much commitment on the last day of the COP. But I was just wanting to start from where Lloyd left, this framing about agriculture being the problem. This is my 8th COP, and this is something that's come across more and more strongly, actually. So I think we should maybe use this panel to discuss how we can transform that narrative and what are the concrete actions we can take in the road to COP30 in Brazil. And I think the starting point to that is regenerative agriculture. And there's so much potential around this term and the activities around that. It's been like one of the key terms I've been hearing all the time. The other one has been methane mitigation. So it's really interesting, all the activities that exist. So maybe in that line, so I can maybe introduce each person as I go to you, if that's okay. Because, Kate, I want to first turn to you. You're from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and you're leading activities around food and sustainability in the World Business Council. And you have an initiative which you launched at COP28 in Dubai, which is about scaling regenerative agriculture. I'd like to know from you what the current status is of that initiative, what are the actions you've taken, and where you'd like to go on the road to COP30. Yeah.
Let's see, this one works okay, you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for the question, and thank you to Bayer and everyone for hosting us here. So I'm from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We are a global collective of businesses working to drive sustainability within value chains. In an ag and food context, so we work with 50 of the largest agri-food businesses around the world, including Bayer, and our vision is very much around nourishing the world within planetary boundaries. So how can we really join the dots between climate, nature, livelihoods, and nutrition? And we know that ag holds the key to deliver on many of those. So as you mentioned, we're not going to reach 1.5 without agriculture, and agriculture plays a huge role, not only in terms of emissions reduction, but in terms of carbon sequestration, right? So transforming ag into a carbon sink is a big priority. and at the same time doing that in a way which delivers for nature, delivers for farmers who are really at the heart of the transition, and in a way which delivers nutrition around the world, which we know is currently a huge challenge, both in terms of undernutrition and overnutrition. So regenerative agriculture is a part of that. It's, we believe, one of the key solutions amongst others, which will help us transform the way that we produce our food and deliver on those fronts. So that's a little bit where AARL, the Action Agenda on Regenerative Landscapes, which was launched last year at COP28, together with the high-level climate champions, World Business Council, BCG. At the launch, we had 30 multi-stakeholder businesses on board, from farmers, business, finance. And the principle really was that if we want to accelerate action towards regenerative agriculture, we really need to start working better together at a landscape level. So hence the title, landscape. So how can we bring folks together in some of those high priority landscapes, which are agri-production landscapes, in order to transform together, to better share the costs, the benefits, the risks? Because we know it doesn't make sense if we have one company focusing on one crop. The farm might produce a range of other crops. We need all these folks in the room to really transition at a landscape level. So launched last year, and at that time we did a bit of a stock take in terms of where those actors are currently investing. So how many farmers they're working with, how many hectares they're working across, how much they're investing. Since that time, over the last year, we've been working together with those 30 founding partners to work out how much progress we're making over the last year and how much progress we want to make again towards COP30. So actually, in the next couple of weeks, in the CCD COP in Riyadh, we'll be launching a progress update with kind of the numbers of where that's got to in terms of how many more hectares are under regen practices. I am happy to talk more about some of the enablers. Maybe we can come back to that, because I think a lot of the work that we're doing is around metrics and measurement alignment. One of the key challenges when we got that group together is that everyone is trying to measure Regen Ag in different ways, and that leads to offering a different set of incentives to farmers. So having those metrics and measurements aligned is really important, so we can talk more about that. And that really has then become the underpin in terms of aligning, in terms of what kind of incentives we need to offer to support farmers to really lead the transition. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a little bit of the action agenda work.
Couple of follow-up points, because I also noticed people define Regen Ag differently across different pavilions. So maybe it's useful for everybody's benefit if you can explain what Regen Ag is to you.
Sure. I mean, so to be honest, the approach we've taken is not to get bogged down in the detail of the best two-sentence description for Regen Ag. We've really tried to be focused on what are the outcomes that Regen Ag is trying to deliver. Yeah. So if we can align around, what do we want to see as a result of Regen Ag? So for us, we've focused on 5 key outcome areas, which are, so at a high level, climate, biodiversity, water, soil health, and livelihoods. Okay. And within each of those 5, we've defined specific outcomes and specific metrics. Okay. And that's really what we want to build the alignment around, is what are the outcomes that we're looking for.
So then those metrics which you define and what you're trying to align will be around these 5 pillars or outcome areas.
Exactly. So we've done a lot of work not only through the action agenda on regen landscapes, but with the business community more widely. Mm-hmm. So we have now a group of nearly 150 businesses that have aligned on these 5 outcome areas. Okay. So when they are talking about Regen Ag, that's what they mean, and that's the direction that they want to work with farmers towards.
And just one more question is, you mentioned the focus of the AARL initiative is on different high priority landscapes. Which are those landscapes, some of them, to give examples?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work happening in Brazil, and I can talk more about how we're trying to accelerate that work, particularly in the Cerrado region. Yeah. Some of the other high priority landscapes which have emerged are in South and Southeast Asia, around rice, particularly in India. And then in Europe, more kind of northwestern Europe, around some of the crops there. So those are some of the landscapes that the members of AARL are more active in, among others.
So maybe we can come back to that, because there are also methane reducing opportunities in some of those landscapes, which is also the other hot topic. So we can maybe connect that. Super. But now I just wanted to get opening remarks from the other speakers as well. So I wanted to turn to Natasha Santos from Bayer. She's the vice president at Bayer. But I was also just thinking, my kind of relationship with WBCSD and Bayer started at my first COP, which was COP 21 in Paris, with Gabby, who was then with Legacy Monsanto, and WBCSD launched this Climate Smart Agriculture Action Plan, right? Yeah. And Monsanto, at that time now Bayer, was one of the first companies to join that together with Kellogg and PepsiCo. Which was the other one? There's one more. Olam. Yeah, so it was like really how Lloyd set the stage, right, about the narratives. That was the first moment I think the private sector was coming together to form a narrative. That time it was around climate smart agriculture. But I've really seen over the years the efforts you put in to lead in the space around climate and agriculture and regenerative agriculture. So we've heard from Kate the bigger picture. What are the actual practical things that you're doing in your portfolio?
Thank you for the question. Look, who is not that familiar with Bayer and our business model? Our customers, we sell to farmers, right? So every strategy or business strategy that we put together, innovation that we invest on, needs to work to find solutions for the challenges that farmers have on their farm. And we have a farmer here that can moderate this conversation. So when we decided to be very open and to frame our business strategy 2 years ago, 3 years ago, more recently, but we've been for a decade now talking about climate smart agriculture, it is about how can we improve the resilience of our farmer customers for our own business resilience, because if they are not successful, we don't exist. We don't have a business. It's very simple rationale. We don't have a business if they cannot be successful on their business, which is farming. So how can we help farmers under the climate conditions, under extreme weather conditions, under all the challenges that we are being discussing here at COP? How can we help them to be resilient and profitable in their business, right? It's very simple. And with that, we decided, as Kate mentioned, in regenerative agriculture, we decided to frame it around regenerative agriculture, that resilience strategy or climate adaptation as well, and mitigation, but climate adaptation strategy, because regenerative agriculture gives us an opportunity to think about outcomes. So the farmer are not dictated how he should farm or not on his farm. He should farm in a way that is profitable and in a way that he can bring those outcomes to life, right? There are innovations that can support practices that will bring those outcomes to life. So we decided to look at our R&D and our business models in a way that we can enable that. So we as Kate mentioned, we look into regenerative agriculture as an out-based model, looking at 5 main outcomes: profitability, yields, biodiverse preservation, soil health, which is the core of it, particularly if you talk about regenerate, water optimization, and reduction of GHG emissions. So with that, we thought, okay, where should we invest on to help farmers to bring that to life? Why? Number one, for resilience, as I mentioned. Number two, they hopefully, and some of the discussions that we're talking here, the farmers can tap into new revenues, either if it is from a carbon market point of view, if it is about policy incentives, if they are providing additional ecosystem services, because the farmers are doing what society expects from them. They are giving us food, fuel, and fiber, right? So that's what they're working on. And then if they can bring those outcomes as well to life, they should be supported and they should be incentivized, because those are additional ecosystem services they are providing. So what we are doing, we have investments from a landscape point of view. We have investment on the soybean value chain. We have investment on the rice value chain. We have investment on the fruits and vegetable value chain, looking into how we can bring with the farmers those outcomes to life. So in soybean, we decided to go into this journey now 4 years ago in Brazil. How can we make those outcomes traceable and those outcomes tangible to the downstream, but as well to society, to policy? So we realized that a few years ago that we are all talking about regenerative agriculture, climate smart practices, but we didn't have methodologies, talking about science, methodologies that could account for tropical agriculture. So we partner with Embrapa, we partner with the farmers. We have more than 2,000 farmers in our program partnering with us. we developed, together with Embrapa, a tropical agriculture calculator that can look into soybean footprint, that can look into traceability, that can then be accounted for if you think about scope 3 and potential revenues that will come from the reduction of GHG emissions. So there's a lot for us to invest on. There's a lot for us to develop with farmers, but the whole strategy from a big company like ours, who has a footprint of more than 250 million hectares, that has a reach of more than 53 million farmers around the world, the strategy is how can we improve their resilience and how can we make those ecosystem service and those outcomes transparent and measurable in a way that we can add value to the farms' operations and to the farmers who are actually providing what society wants from them.
Thanks, Natasha, for that. I just had a question, so a follow-up question, wondering from a regulatory or policy perspective, what is the incentive that you get for doing this, or do you get anything?
Me as buyer?
Huh?
Me as buyer? Or the
Buyer, yeah.
No, for me is the sustainability of our business, right?
Yeah.
So we need to develop innovations that can contribute to, that can enable the practices that will contribute to those regenerative agriculture outcomes. For example, our investments on seeds. We are a seeds company, right? So now when we are looking at our breeding operations and when we are looking at developing our seeds, new seeds around the world, we are looking at things like what are the root systems of those seeds, our corn, Precision, short starch corn system. Can we develop the seeds that would have longer root systems that then could contribute to carbon sequestration, that can contribute to water optimization? Can you look into a way that nitrogen fixation that can help to optimize, for example, crop nutrition or crop protection use in the farm? So we are looking at innovation, of course, number one, from a yields point of view, because the farmer needs to be productive. But now we are trying to look at innovation in a way that could contribute to those, could enable those practices and contribute to those outcomes as well. From optimization point of view of inputs. Inputs is water, but inputs as well is crop nutrition and crop protection that can help with carbon sequestration science, soil health, and then help farmers to enable those regenerative agriculture outcomes. So that's the benefit is we'll strengthen their farm operation, and then eventually we will enable those regenerative agriculture outcomes. And then for me is then the farmer will buy my product. Pretty much like that. And from an incentive point of view is we are working on an innovation hub on. It's not only my innovations that we enable all of that. We need a lot of offering for the farmers, from machinery, from data science, from data platforms, from drones, from satellites. We need a lot of inputs, and we need a lot of innovation for the farmers to be able to manage the farm operations, to manage their productivity, and then to be able to make those outcomes transparent and traceable and measurable in their farms.
Thanks, Natasha. We'll come back to some of those points later, but now I want to move to Brad. Brad Doyle is from Eagle Seed. He's a farmer. He's from a family of farmers as well. So actually, I also have a background in farming in my own family. I'm not actively farming now, but so I could relate to it. And when I'm hearing some of these comments, I was just thinking, okay, from a farmer perspective, now in addition to producing food, you have to also be doing all these other things, plus measuring that and reporting that. It's a lot of additional work, right? So how do you make sense of that? Like, what is your take on the regenerative agriculture approach?
So yes, just FYI, I soybean farmer, rice and wheat in Arkansas in the U.S. Third generation farm. We actually have our fourth generation now. We, even though it says Eagle Seed, we're a family farm first, but my father-in-law, mother-in-law started a seed company. He was a plant breeder. My wife is a plant breeder, so we're very passionate about research. On our farm, we grow non-GMO, GMO, and we work with gene editing. So we have a lot of the top tools in our toolbox as far as what plants performance will bring us in the future. So I think, U.S. farmers are very receptive to research, multi-year research. So when a new idea concept comes around, like regenerative ag, you know, we're not. Some farmers are hesitant to adopt that right off the bat, but if they're seeing it at field days and farm visits and research, you know, we work a lot in the U.S. with our university, Land Grant University. A lot of this research is funded by the farmers through our checkoff, soybean and rice checkoff and corn. But, you know, there's some mechanics of regenerative ag that don't fit some of our farms. Livestock, I have no livestock. In my area, it's mainly all row crops, so the livestock aspect would be very hard for us to achieve, but the nutrient management is one that absolutely we're all in on. I use a lot of poultry litter on my farm. We have a circular bioeconomy where the soybeans that I produce, you know, go into meal, feed that the poultry farmers purchase. The rice that I grow, the rice hulls go in as bedding. I purchase that back in the form of litter, so that is one of the nutrient points that regenerative ag brings to the table. We also, you know, use more efficient fertilizer additives, so we can bring down our synthetic fertilizer use by company industry providing products that work for that method. Tillage and the disturbance of soil. I think we are much lighter tillage operators now than we were, that our grandfathers, you know, fathers and grandfathers were. So we're just would say light surface residue managers now. The deep tillage that you see a lot in Europe, we've gone away from that. The moldboard plows, the deep tillage. So rice in particular is a heavy residue crop, and it's a complement to waterfowl and wildlife management. So cover crops are really hard to incorporate with rice production. Well, let me back up. On Monday, we were visiting with some friends here at this booth, and the first question to the rice farmers was, do you direct seed? Well, of course, that's all we've ever done in the U.S., so I would call us an innovator one. That is the way we do it in the U.S., direct seeding of rice. And there's many benefits to that, reducing the methane release. But yeah, I mean, back to your point, farmers like to see results, either neighbors. We may be slow to adopt. We are very fast to adopt technology. Let me back up, because through GPS and tractor technology, we are all in on that. We you know, a lot of cases, consult with John Deere and Case, two of the top manufacturers, and we want the best, and we have the best equipment. Industry partners, genetics, breeding techniques, you guys have been there from the beginning, and that is what has put us at the top tier in my mind on U.S. production. And so we're getting there. The regenerative ag, it's going to be has been a slow process, but there's many of the points that I see a bright future in U.S. farming agriculture.
I have a follow-up question as well, which is when you were explaining some of the things you're doing, like the more precise fertilizers you're buying, the circular economy approaches you're taking, I'm just thinking it could also be more expensive to do those things, right? Or is it not?
Well, so yeah, it needs to be profitable. You know, farmers, we're businessmen, and I would say in the U.S. we have a high education level for U.S. farmers. So it's still a business. It needs to pencil out, and it's not that expensive. I think we're just more hesitant because we still get yield response from fertilizers. For you to tell me I need to back off fertilizer, sometimes, you know, it's going to take me a little bit to get that. So I think that's where our Climate Smart Commodity Partners partnership funding from our U.S. Department of Agriculture has helped incentivize, as mentioned earlier, incentives, voluntary incentive-based gets us much faster results.
How does that incentive system work?
So if we have the CCC and the Commodity Credit Corporation in the U.S., there was a funding pool there that USDA tapped to bring through proposals. So we have hundreds of different proposals out there on ways to combat climate and so it almost gave us a 2 or 3, 5-year buffer to try new things. And this is a very exciting time. I think we're in our first full year of it, maybe second, but so we have a broad list of activities, and I think from that, the very successful will be adopted quicker, much quicker than those that were maybe not as successful. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you, Brett. And I'll come back to it. Super interesting. But I just want to go to Mohammed now to get your initial impressions. So, Mohammed, you're Director of Technical Cooperation at ICA. But before that, you were Director General and Research Professor at CUTI as well. And I was just looking at your really illustrious background, like 35 years of research. So I have actually two questions for you. So first is from an ICA perspective, because I see all the flags here with all the countries you work in. So from this perspective, how do you see regenerative agriculture advancing in the countries you work in? But then as a research professor, what do you think are the challenges and opportunities? Because you've seen other terms and advances in research over this time. So what do you think are those big challenges and opportunities from a research perspective as well?
Well, thank you. Let me thank Bayer for inviting us to participate, but also in your collaboration, especially with Living Soils, which is part of the whole solution for regenerative agriculture. Well, ICA recognizes the importance of regenerative agriculture for accelerating the food system transformation, but also to address the planetary crisis which has been discussed and as part of the solution to that. We have good databases which is supporting how improved practices are contributing to reducing the emissions, the biodiversity, also the conservation of water, which are these important issues, while at the same time improving the livelihoods of people. So that's very clear. But as you mentioned, we are working in 34 countries with different agroecological conditions, different socioeconomic contexts. We have an interest on family farming also. We have a program on family farming which is targeting the importance of family farmers to practice our regenerative agriculture, but also to enhance the supply chains of food production, especially as it relates. And Brazil has some good example of the implementation of policies in this respect. So in this context, we promote good sustainable practices in terms of knowledge management, advancing in this area. And I would like to come back on the landscape approach that you have. And I think we have a program on family agriculture and territorial development. But understanding the policy scape that you have public policies, which are the command and control protected areas, which are playing an important role for biodiversity and water resources and the watershed, but also integrating this into the private holdings. How do you promote regenerative agriculture to have a summation in terms of the ecosystem services that you have, but also looking at the farming systems of how do you practice more sustainable agriculture production in this area. In this respect, Costa Rica has been a country that has been very advanced in payment for ecosystem services, especially as it relates to the forestry, but now they are moving what they call, and ICA is supporting this, the second generation of payment for ecosystem services on the agro-landscape context. And that involves promoting more regenerative agriculture. We have a gradient of different regenerative agriculture systems we've been developing, be it zero tillage, which Appreciate from Argentina has been in championing with its groups. Brazil has got the ABC, low carbon initiatives, but also where I've worked before, we have developed good knowledge in terms of multi-strata agroforestry systems, which has been promoting more production, more diversity, while at the same time ecosystem services, improving the soil. We have seen a good relation between more diverse agroforestry systems and carbon-rich carbon capture, but also biodiversity. So you look for those triple wins that you have in terms of what are the systems that we have developed and where farmers are using. Throughout Central America, I think there are more than 90% of the farms with cocoa and coffee already with multi-strata agroforestry systems, which you look at how do you move to scale from the research towards scaling up And I think that, with the issues and the policies being promoted by European Union and zero deforestation, Costa Rica has been the first country that exported coffee with sustainable, deforestation-free, with sustainable agroforestry systems as one example. I would like to come back to what you said about the traits of the plants. I think that's something we have studied also in terms of what are the traits in terms of the facilitating, regulating roles that they play in terms of how do you use agrobiodiversity or biodiversity for enhancing the productivity, but also looking at ecosystem services. We have very good data also which shows that small forest patches in the coffee plantations are promoting more pollination of the coffee and more productivity. But also now with Brazil, with Embrapa and other countries, we're looking at biological nitrogen fixation with grasses, especially some of the native grasses, understanding the need to have more diversity in the system to look at the resilience and sustainability. And there are good examples where we've advanced on that. You mentioned the theme of bioinputs or biofertilizers. ICA has a program on bioeconomy. Bioinputs is one of the main components. But what we see in terms of the countries advancing in this from a commercial scale is, one is the production and stable production of the commodity, complying with the quality and the standards that you need, the standardization of the products. That's something we've been working with. There are already advances in countries like Argentina, in Brazil, in Cuba, and other countries, where we see experiences in how they've been managing bioinputs. But also, we need to look at the regulatory frameworks for the organic biofertilizers, biopesticides that we work on. We know the consumers are looking for more responsible production at the farm level in terms of the use of pesticides and fertilizers. And we understand that this can be part of the solution in an integrated approach of how do you use inorganic fertilizers with organic fertilizers, and understanding the trade-offs and where you're going to have the multiple benefits that you're going to have in this area. So I think there is a good compelling case of why we should scale up more regenerative agriculture to address the problems that are being discussed. And what you asked about the challenges and the opportunities, I think the challenge is how to force. I think the whole concept of a regenerative agriculture needs to be translated in a simple way of how do you explain to farmers of this, There are a lot of concepts coming out like nature-based solutions, regenerative agriculture, resilient systems, and how do you get in a simple language to the farmers to that? I think that's very important. Strengthening the extension services to get out the knowledge. We see there's a large gap. So ICA has been working on digital tools. We have good experiences where we've been advancing in the application of digital tools, of getting out information and training youths and also with a gender approach within these areas. Building a good business case for regenerative agriculture so you can have the banks providing credits with conditions on the adoption of responsible practices. I have a project in Honduras which is looking at the NAMA facility for livestock, which is looking at how do you transform the livestock sector into a low-carbon economy, and using the experiences we have developed. And the credits will be aligned with a condition that the farmers are adopting these practices because we want to make sure that the risks of failures of the farmers taking the credits and investing on the farms will lead to more successful ventures, of course. The decisions has to be participatory. What are the options that the farmers have? Where are the opportunities? And what are the plans that they need to get in to make a farm plan of what are the transitions that they need. Yeah. We see a problem with upfront investments in the changes as one of the challenges that we have in some of the practices, especially some of the silvopastoral practices that we've been promoted. There, in some cases, is it possible to pay upfront payment for carbon sequestration or biodiversity? For example, in Costa Rica, again, there's been experimenting on changes in terms of paying additionality of carbon in base of compliance with what you've done, but we can make some estimates on what are the proxies you're going to have in terms of what the changes and how this will be advanced in terms of for ecosystem services. Supply of seeds, I think this was mentioned. It's important that the farmers have a good supply of seeds. And here, ICA has been working to broaden the spectrum in terms of the number of food, different crops being consumed. We know that there are a large number of crops out there with underutilized, with traits that have important value for nutrition, but also important value for the ecosystem services. And we need to integrate this more within the farming systems to have more agrobiodiversity using agroecological approaches that we work on.
I had a follow-up question actually,
Yeah.
because I think that was a really nice picture of all the things happening. But if you could say a little bit more about what regenerative agriculture looks like in livestock systems. You mentioned silvopastoral systems, because we had quite a bit of crop-related interventions, and I know you're an expert on silvopastoral systems. So if you could share what regenerative agriculture looks in livestock systems.
Well, you know, if you look at the data in the whole of Latin America, a large percent of the pastures have been degraded, and we have been working to regenerate these pastures. Not only looking at trees, but also looking at the diversity of different improved grasses, but also looking at the native grasses that you've got, but integrating legumes in these systems. And if you go into Central America, a large percentage of these farms are having more natural regeneration of trees, or diversity of trees, which we have measured of more than like 100 species in the landscape, which is a very diverse landscape. So farmers have been, I recall like in the forest when I started my first project with the GEF on the silvopastoral project, I spoke to a farmer of planting trees in his farms, and he said the cows don't eat trees, they eat grasses alone. But after more than 25 years, the landscape where we work now have changed to show that, you know, working with farmers, making understanding what are the importance, in this case, trees, in terms of how do it improve the productivity of the farms and the sustainability, and understanding the relationships between the interactions. For example, the heat stress of the animals. Today, the temperatures are much 2 or 3 degrees higher in some cases. We have measured the impacts on the productivity of the cows producing up to 13% of milk if they are under the shade trees. So now, farmers themselves are retaining shade trees in the pastures, regenerating, understanding their roles and functions. And also, we systemize the local knowledge of farmers in terms of what they knew about the function of trees in terms of protecting the water sites or improving the soils, and why they are retaining the preference of some of these native species or on the farms. So, building a participatory approach and using the local knowledge with our scientific research that we have done, we have designed the farms together with the farmers in terms of what they should be done doing the farms, and in terms of what the silvopastoral systems can be done. Now, there are different land use practices or silvopastoral practices, and based on which conditions you are. If you are more in the dry conditions, then the role of trees and shrubs will become more important for feeding animals, especially because of the roots that you mentioned, which are going to the deeper layers, producing more forages of high value when the grasses are all dry. So we need to plan the whole systems on understanding the role and functions that each of the species are going to have in different times and different stress. And understanding that the drought now are more prolonged, especially the El Nino effect is 2 months. We have seen changes in the whole patterns, and therefore farmers will have to practice more adaptive management, a more flexible management based on the context, as we have seen, which is more frequent now on the droughts or even the flooded conditions which we have. And I would like to close on a point when we look at the landscape to invite the World Business Council to consider the dry forest corridor of Central America as one of the landscape where ICA can collaborate. We think that's an area of much importance where you have seen a lot of impacts on food security, and in fact, much of the migration has been driven because of the climate effects that we have in these areas also. That might be one of the opportunities.
Thanks, Mohammed. Maybe, Kate, you can respond to that suggestion, but I also have a question for you to follow up, because I heard a lot of good things, good activities, but then it's also very complex, right? So I just wondered, when you were talking about the metrics and indicators and how you're planning to align this amongst companies, you know, to have a common set. So I was wondering how can that be done across such diverse systems, such diverse activities, and also what Mohammed said, we need to make it simple enough in terms of translation, and so farmers can use it. So how would you do that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think also it's about aligning on what we're measuring, but it's also aligning on how we measure it, right? In a way which works for the different stakeholders in the system. So, you know, Mohammed, you were talking about some of the research around what works and what doesn't work. That we really need data to understand, you know, what practices have what kind of effects. Brad, you were talking about farmers being very responsive to research, right? So having that data available in a way which delivers insights for farmers who are the ones driving the practices. You know, how will this impact my business? What does it mean in terms of yields? What does it mean in terms of soil health? And what kind of crops that's going to allow me to grow? And Natasha, you talked about the data and the measurement approaches actually not being there in certain parts of the world. So there are some regions where there's quite an abundance of data. There's other regions where actually the estimates, the models are not there. You mentioned Latin America. We see the same in our rice work, for example, in certain parts of the world. So what we're trying to do, and the role of the private sector, is in terms of aligning on metrics, but also supporting a way of measuring that, which is kind of cost-effective, scalable across supply chains. There's a huge amount of data out there. It's all really interesting, but how can we align on kind of a core set of indicators and measurement approaches that give us the key insights that we need to drive action? That's kind of the way that we're framing it. And then there's a big link there to financing, because if we have alignment on the metrics and how we're measuring them in the private sector and with financial partners, then we can kind of collectively point incentives and finance towards those outcomes. So that's a little bit kind of how we're working through with members.
So just a follow-up question, because I'm not an expert on this. So is it practically then like farmers would be putting in some things into a phone or something like that?
This is the question. So there's a number of different ways, right, that you can measure these outcomes. There are ways which are more time intensive for farmers, and actually they can be very well integrated with existing farm management software. So there's efficiencies you can manage there. There are other hugely exciting developments which rely more on perhaps remote sensing, which works really well in some cases. It has limitations in other cases. There are areas of the world where secondary data is pretty good. There are areas of the world where secondary data is not that good. Yeah. So there's a huge variety of kind of data measurement approaches out there. And I guess the questions that we're working, and this is where it really comes down to the landscape level, is in this landscape, what data is available? What data do farmers have? What data do they not have? What can we collect easily? What's available through public databases, for example? So that's kind of the work we're trying to do at the landscape level in terms of defining, you know, how do we efficiently work together to get this data in a way which doesn't require us to spend all of our budget on data collection, but allows us to focus the finance, which is where it's needed in supporting farmers.
Yeah. But will people share this data if it's in different systems?
That is something which the World Business Council is strongly advocating for and working to support, is in terms of at least if not all the data, at least if not all the kind of assumptions behind the data point are shared, at least that the data is interoperable. So if you have different systems coming together, we know that they're measuring it in the same way, and then it can be compared and combined. Then you would do that comparison. You would do that comparison across systems. So we're not, World Business Council ourselves, we're not a kind of data platform. We don't intend to kind of host data ourselves, but we're strongly advocating and working with the kind of data community in support of that with the private sector.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you so many times. It's super interesting.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
I was just curious. Do you have anything more to add?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, but maybe then I want to turn to Natasha, because all these things about data and digital farming, and I had a visit to Bayer in St. Louis with Gabby and visited all your facilities. You have a system for collecting data. You have also some things which we saw to add to farm equipment. So how are you approaching this data question, which Kate described? How are you collecting data? How are you analyzing it? Are there opportunities to share it with others as well?
Yeah. No, the primary focus of our data collection and data analysis is on innovation of our, looking at our portfolio, right? So our main focus is how the crops that we invest on, we invest in more than 30 crops, but how is the crop performance under certain conditions? For example, we have an investment and a partnership with the UAE at the moment with 6 different fruit and vegetable crops in desert conditions. Is an adaptation, climate adaptation investment, and then we are looking at high temperatures, high humid, with field trials as well on closed and open environments. So it's our data collection and our data analysis is how our seeds perform from a quality point of view under certain conditions, under certain field conditions. And that's the main investment for us from an AI point of view, etc. Of course, then how do you apply those innovations on the farm? That's our partnership with our farmers' customers, right? So we have a few, with our climate field view, we have a few offering to the farmers so they can improve their farm operations. They can look at it can help that decision making in terms of how they apply certain inputs, how they make the decisions in the season on how to use our innovation to the best performance of their farm. So our investment on AI, on data platform is focused on that. However, what Kate was saying, if we want to find, first of all, there are two things that the farmers are focusing on. One is their return of investment, right? Their profitability, as was mentioned here. So they need to make sure that they will have profits at the end of the season, number one. And the second is they will do interventions as long as they can mitigate the risks. So we need to work on, depending on the landscape and where we are looking in the world, we need to look into interventions or supports that will help them to mitigate the risks of any change, right? So that's where data comes into play. Those are insights, or those would enable certain type of reduced cost loans, for example, or we were talking the other day with finance, with the finance sector, even insurance. The data models today for crop insurance, not only on yields or even if they are looking at weather conditions, the data models needs a lot of data. The data models needs to change as well. The insurance company, and I know there were a lot here in COP, they need to innovate in their offering to farmers because they need to account now for different data sets to be able to provide certain offering that takes into account different climate conditions around the world, right? It's something innovative, but for example, nowadays England is one of the best sparkling wine in the world because of climate conditions, right? So the world is changing, the seasons are changing, so we need to get a lot of that data into local context to be able to provide to farmers, of course, resilience, but to be able to innovate from inputs like seeds or crop protection, crop nutrition, to help them to do certain practice. But we need to innovate in places that maybe is not common in our discussion, but we need to innovate in places like finance. And so all this data gathering and all the insights from certain practices around the world and intervention center value chains will help to improve those offerings that will improve the resilience of farmers and then keep feeding us around the world and keep providing those ecosystem services, but more importantly, food security in many places around the world.
Yeah, just a follow-up question, Natasha. It's like you mentioned the collaboration with the financial sector. How does that work in practice? Is it like because they have these regenerative practices, they get a lower interest rate, or how does it practically work?
There are many type of interventions depending what you're looking at. For example, on direct seeded rice, which is a huge transformation for us in India, although in the US is a common practices, in India it's a huge opportunity because it has the potential to reduce 40% of water use. We all know how water-intensive rice is. It has the potential to reduce GHG emissions because of methane by 45%. So it's massive. And it's the main rice producer around the world, India. So the impact to the world is massive, right? But one of the main challenges is the machinery are not there for direct seeded rice. The insurance offering are not there. For example, one of the main challenges to transform from TPR to DSR is the germination risk, because you're changing the practice. You're not flooding anymore. It's dry land. So it's a new practices, and how is that soil going to respond? So we are investing in hybrid and genetics of rice, but we need insurance to help farmers to account for the risk that maybe it's not going to germinate in the first season, right? But there's no data, massive data that is needed for the insurance models to be able to provide the offering that will be cost efficient for the farmer, right? So what we are doing is partnering with farmers in certain landscape in India, getting the data with them, providing to the finance sector so they can run their models. It's very sophisticated. I'm not a finance expert. And then they can provide innovation in solution to those smallholder farmers. It is from a cooperative point of view. How can they provide a solution that is cost effective? And regenerative agriculture is it's not in one season that you're going to have all those outcomes and all that transformation. We're talking about 3, 6, sometimes 10 years. So you need constant investment and constant innovation to help them manage the risk. It's their livelihood, right? So manage the risk and being profitable throughout the season. Otherwise, the farmers are going to leave. They're not going to make money. And then there's the more impacts in terms of degraded land. So to answer your question is a partnership, is data accessibility, and then the finance needs to run their models to be able to provide an offering that works for the farmers, right? And works for them as well.
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. So, Brad, I want to turn back to you. Actually, firstly, curious to hear your reflections on some of the things which have been said. But early on, you mentioned in your initial set of comments about adoption by farmers. So I'm hearing all the good things about regenerative agriculture. What are the things needed to ensure that adoption rates are increased?
So yeah, just to comment, follow up on Natasha's comment about the direct seeding of rice. So it will be a management change because water serves as a herbicide. Prevents a lot of weed seed from germinating. So that will need to be approached as the confirmation happens. So and I think we have great tools, great research, great crop protection products that will allow that to happen. A couple of points too that I didn't mention earlier. We are very aware of erosion and what it can do to downstream systems. I think in our part of the world where irrigation is a huge part of our farming operations, we have, not only getting water on fields, but getting water off of fields is very important for us. So we have a lot of structures in place to reduce erosion, control water, release, holding water in the off season for benefits of conservation and waterfowl, but also nutrient management. Rice is one of the most efficient filters of and making clean water on the release end of the field than any other crop. So we have some unique applications of fertilizer into rice with urea, flying it on dry early and then into the flood later. Variable rate technology of fertilizer is strongly practiced in the U.S. We, to pinpoint accuracy, small grid samples, we may have a 100-acre field that has 20 or 40 different fertilizer analysis. So as the machinery goes across the field, applies the fertilizer, we are putting out just enough. We're not over-fertilizing. And to that point, we're not over-seeding, over-applying pesticides or crop protection products. We are very accurate, and the technology allows us to do that. The incentives have been mentioned both through our USDA, but also industry, and we commend you on offering different options for farmers. That is what's going to get us there. Will be the options, the opportunity. If it's a partnership with a manufacturer on use of their products and their practices to reward them, continue on. I know y'all have some great ideas out there. Many companies do. It needs to be an open conversation. Give the farmer the ability to choose. Forcing one program on a farmer, it's not a one-size-fits-all. That will really slow this progression or the adoption of regenerative ag. I think it has so many levels. If I look at the Midwest, the flatland, historic corn and soybean rotation, it is very easy to no-till and introduce cover crops. In areas where we introduce cotton and rice and peanuts, it needs to be a different means of getting that regenerative agriculture process adopted on the farm. So, and I think we have a generation too. You know, we are very hard-headed sometimes. We like to do what Grandpa did, you know, and Father adopted a little bit more. And we've come a long way. And Mark and I's, you know, generation, our dads and, you know, grandfathers, the equipment has gotten much larger, much more technologically advanced. The data that, you know, that Bayer and other companies allow access to, it's amazing. And this younger generation is probably, you know, they are an IT-driven, you know, farmer. So, hey, who knows? You know, they can farm from their desk in their office, right? Eventually, we have the capability in the near future. But yeah, I think regenerative ag, it has a place, and it will be adopted at different levels. In different regions of the U.S. on different soil types, so it's really complicated, but we have solutions.
Yeah, but you made it really simple.
Yes.
And explain how it can be done in different contexts. Really appreciate that. Any quick comments on this question about data and data collection and interoperability? How do you do that?
So that, you know, that is a complicated ask. Data, we have machinery. Our combines are collecting data, and that is a very useful tool for us. Yield maps, just for instance, one particular, we can, you know, overlap on, you know, low fertility areas of field that needs more, maybe it needs a higher or lower seed density at planting. It needs more or less fertilizer. So that data that the farmer uses is, you know, as of right now, is free to share at their discretion. And if I think there's different opinions on who owns data. Is my data worth, does it have a value? Yeah. You know, so I think if we're looking from our government or industry, I would just caution, you know, don't be specific to certain farms on sharing data, but county by county, absolutely, our NAST, our Statistics Service of the United States, we do that, and that is a public issue. I mean, NASA Acres in particular, I'll call out a friend of mine, Liz Whitcraft. You know, they are working on a program now, and their plan is to be able to detect carbon sequestration from satellites imagery. I mean, that is mind-blowing on the capabilities in the near future, or CO2 emissions, and I think you could use that in any setting, livestock or tree production or whatever. But yeah, I think data is very valuable, because back to the research, farmers use data to make decisions every day.
Thanks, Brad. You really make things very simple, so really appreciate that. We still have to do the COP conversation, but I'm thinking we just open up for some questions to the panel. We have a bit of discussion and then move on to that, if that's okay. Are there any questions, comments? There's one over there. I'll take a few at a time. So there's one, two. Anyone else? So I'll come to you first, sir.
Sure, thank you.
Introduce yourself as well. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm Bob Lowe. I'm the president of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and my question's to Kate. We've been talking about data here for a long time, and we're collecting data now on the livestock industry globally. Our problem is, how do you put it into a form that is relevant for every region of the world, so you can take it forward without 100 different types, I guess.
Thank you. Let me just get the other question as well. Oh, yeah, over there.
Yeah, hi, I'm Duncan Williamson from Rainforest Alliance, and soon to be the Food Systems Lead for IIED. We work with 7.5 million smallholder farmers in the tropical rainforest belt, and they don't do data. They don't have access to data, so they don't feel excluded from this conversation. This conversation around regenerative agriculture, one of our priorities is regenerative agriculture across our systems and the landscape approach, which we really welcome. But the conversation they're having on regenerative agriculture is very, 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 very different. They don't get benefits from companies supporting them. They don't want to use pesticides. They don't get government subsidies. So is there a risk that the conversations on regenerative agriculture are going in two different directions, and how do we bring them together to make sure all the farmers have a voice, not just the farmers with the loudest voice? And how do we support the smallholders, supply this data that companies so desperately need so that they can deliver the solutions? And how can we then learn from each other?
Okay, thanks, Duncan. Yeah, I don't see any other comments. So maybe, Kate, if you could first respond to that direct question, and you may have reflections on this point as well.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I was actually at an event recently with someone from the US Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and we were talking about this question of the data. There is a lot of data that's already available. So, yes, there's exciting innovations happening that I mentioned, and but actually, how can we work better with the data that is available? And your point, I think, was around how do we translate that into something which works well at a regional level, right?
And put it in a form that we as the Global Roundtable, for instance, can take to the FAO, to World Economic Forum, and say this is what's happening globally without having to do it individually. How high do you have to get to be able to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that we work a lot with the private sector, right? So one of the challenges for businesses that we're working with, and Natasha, you can probably jump in on this, is a lot. There is value to having data which is collated at a global level when you're trying to map kind of total impacts of a particular intervention, or when you're trying to direct finance at that high level. But actually, there is also value in having data which is. It depends who the audience is, right? So there's also data which needs to be valuable for farmers in particular regions. But I think what we're trying to do is say, okay, but across all of those different levels that you might have data, or audiences that might be using those data, can we at least be consistent in kind of the outcomes that we're talking about, and have some principles in terms of how we're measuring it, so that we kind of have confidence that we're comparing apples with apples. That's kind of some of the principles we're working on.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on that other point as well?
Yeah.
Accessibility to different kinds of farmers.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we say that farmers need to be at the centre of this, but I always feel very conscious of talking about farmers as one group, right? It's very different depending on, as you mentioned, Brad, where you're farming, what you're farming, the soil type, and there's such geographic differences. And a big difference between the size of the farm. And I think your question was particularly about data, so with a kind of data hat on, that also, there's big differences then, right, in terms of how that data delivers value for farmers and what they're looking to learn from that data. Brad, you were talking about research being really important and driving much of your decision making. It's the same with smallholder farmers, but it's a different kind of data and the insights that they're looking to draw from that. So I think for us also working with the private sector, the WBCSD members are, there are farmers that are well connected to global value chains, where that kind of flow of finance from the private sector is, you can clearly map that. There are farmers that are not so connected with global value chains, and then the kind of financing package looks quite different. A few thoughts.
Natasha? Yeah, Brad.
So I think part of regenerative ag is a mindset too, and we are not doing it. We do a lot of cover crop research. So that would be my input to the conversation back in my hometown. But I'm not doing it for the money. It is it's for the benefits for everyone. I think maybe you might, and I can understand the smallholder farmer not having access, might not even have a computer or smartphone to be able to access that. But they are selling their products somewhere, and maybe that's the level you need to go into and offer incentives there. So we're more likely, and it's very easy to, our grains are commingled. So large, a combine hopper at a time gets in a truck, goes to the mill, it's mingled with all my neighbors' grain. But there's one buying point there. So there's an opportunity to incentivize the whole system, regenerative ag. You could put Regen Ag here in this bin, non-Regen here, and offer a premium on this product. That's one way to look at it. The livestock part, you'd have to ask an expert how you would handle that. And even if the small holder, understand if they're just selling it locally. But there's a marketing tool or opportunity there that I see. But I understand your concerns about that.
Yep. Thanks, Brad. There's just a quick comment here, and then going to you, Natasha. Just
Thank you very much. I'm Francisco Melo from NAICA, and has been my life, or at least part of it. I have been like a technocrat, and before that I was a soil scientist. I just want to add something really, really short. Mohammed mentioned that we have an initiative called Living Soils of the Americas, which is sponsored by Bayer and other companies from the private sector. We have been, for previous years, trying to find best and better evidences to show the impacts and the contribution of the agriculture in all aspects, the regenerative agriculture practices, in order to increase soil carbon sequestration and mitigate climate change. A few days ago, we had a very interesting meeting here with the Ministry of Rural Development of Brazil, for example, a country which has like 4 million smallholders. I'm Brazilian, by the way, just to give you some feedback and then some background. And we have been discussing actually that we need to find a new approach that actually can help us to validate like this methodology and show their contribution to food security, climate change, and so on. We're also part of a very interesting center created this year, which is part of the University of Sao Paulo, called the Center for Carbon Studies in Tropical Agriculture. We're also very proud to be part of it. But in any sense, an outcome that I just wish to share to this community here is that 2 days ago, precisely, we published a paper showing and based like 13 to 15,000 evidences about the impacts of the best practices that we already know and their impacts and benefits across the Americas region. So what we found is that if we consider, for example, 30% of the land are still degraded, we would have at least the potential to mitigate almost like 40% of current emissions from the sector. This is very, very important and robust information. But again, there are limitations, of course they are. One of them is that the majority of papers or published papers are just going until like 30 centimeters deep. And we do have like root systems that go like beyond like 1 meter, as mentioned by Bayer, by Natasha Santos and other colleagues. So we still need to advance really fast in getting more evidences, more robust evidences that includes everyone, all the kind of agriculture practices, so we can actually change the way how people are seeing our sector. I think we can definitely do a great contribution to climate change while keeping food security at highest levels, which is precisely what we do need. Thank you very much.
thank you, Francisco. Natasha, would you like to add something based on the questions and comments here?
Yeah, my God, what to add? I think they cover everything.
Then we go to COP30. You can add on that also, how we bring this to COP30.
Yeah, no, I think, so from our point of view, and I think Brad really answered perfectly. I believe you need to have the market mechanisms and the incentives on that value chain that you referring to. We provide solutions for 53 million farmers today. We want to provide to many more, but it's quite, we don't work only with large farmers, we work with all type of farmers, of course, in the value chain that we invest on, right? 30 different crops. So it's significant. The data and the knowledge and the way we are innovating is to provide solutions to that those customers in that large in the world and with the diversity that you can imagine that 53 million farmers have. So I think we need to find, I hope, and I see that the discussions here at COP29 looks like we are coming to the conclusion that we need a lot of private capital to deliver on the ambitions that we have as a society. So we need to have the private sector on the table, and we need to discuss market incentives with the transparency, with the expectation, of course, the society wants, with the outcomes that society wants, but the right market incentives to make those things come to reality. And we need to sit at the table, we need to have the dialogue, we need to discuss, agree and disagree, but we need to find the right intervention and incentives to unlock things at scale that we want. If we keep being right and wrong, or if we want to dictate, for example, maybe many people doesn't know, but we're probably the first or the second input provider in organic farming. we just want the farmers to be successful as long as there are incentives, and we're going to continue to provide. Farmers have pests, weeds, and disease pressure. How can we solve those pressure and make it sustainable and bring that commodities and those crop outputs to society to feed for food security, for food, fuel, and fiber. So if we can find ways and incentives to make that successful, that's what we're going to do.
Thanks, Natasha. Maybe just maybe we are over time actually, so also to kind of close out a little bit, what would be a comment or ask? We started with that comment from COP29 presidency which came out.
Yeah.
So you outlined all these opportunities. What would be your message for COP30 presidents?
We need agriculture. So I hope, my dream is, and I love those dialogues, and I think more and more we have a more diverse conversation and more diverse players on the table. My dream is that we stop finger pointing or blaming or put agriculture under the bus, and we understand that it's not going to go away, right? Because we need farmers to provide that to society, as we discussed it. And agriculture can be part of the solution, and is part of the solution because it's already providing for many years. So how we can incentivize, how we can invest on innovation, and how can we align the incentives in a way farmers are happy, profitable, over generation 10th. They're investing on the farm, they are there in the land and taking care, being the stewards of the land, and providing what society needs. And if it's more transparency, we have data. I think what excites me is that we have technology, we have data, and we understand the pressure point. So can we sit together and find solutions that are workable? Otherwise, we're not gonna make things at scale globally the way that society wants. So let's sit down, let's do the intervention on a local level, let's make it happen, stop dreaming, make it happen on the ground, and make it at scale.
Thanks, amazing. And it's all recorded, so we can note it down and make a narrative based on it. But Mohammed, I was also hoping maybe you can address that comment about different kinds of farmers, because you work with all kinds of farmers.
Well, I think the question here is many of the farmers are in informal markets. So we need to look at a differentiated strategy and policies. How do you address these informal markets? And here's where ICA is playing an important role to organize farmers and cooperatives, providing new inputs and good technical assistance and digital tools. And those group of farmers are also involved in promoting more regenerative agriculture. So I think you need to look at this differentiation and how do we address that. Coming back to the question about the road to the COP, I think ICA is going to continue, and I hope the sub-director will agree with me. Continue on the debate, providing the evidence and scientific information of how where regenerative agriculture is part of the solution towards, and agriculture itself as part of the solution to the multiple planetary crisis, and having a sustainable and resilient food systems. We know that the NDCs, many of the countries are now retooling the NDCs, and we're going to work together with all these countries, understanding that the ministers of agriculture are part of the governing body of ICA, and providing them with evidence and see how to build in regenerative agriculture and good practices within these NDCs. But also we need to integrate all the sectors, not only the agriculture ministries, but also the environment, and having engagement of the farmers' organizations, and also providing them with information so they can have more important role in advocacy in how do we have a transition towards a more sustainable and resilient food system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. And one of my key takeaways was, this whole area around data and digital. So we maybe need to engage the IT ministries as well. And I know Brazil had, in G20, the digitalization was a big priority. So maybe there's a opportunity there. Kate, your closing comments and road to COP30.
Very quick, road to COP30, I think we are hugely encouraged by the kind of growing momentum around food at these COP discussions. And we really look forward to translating a lot of that into delivery. So the Emirates Declaration, which Mohammed mentioned, really looking forward to seeing governments translate NDCs into what that means for food, and businesses here, ready to support and help with implementation on that. We're running out of time, but Marcelo here, my colleague who's leading a lot of the work around business engagement on the road to COP30, so I maybe just give a shout that he's around to talk more on that.
So, Natasha, let's get it done, right? Let's go to work. But participation, it involves participation. It'll be my duty and my fellow farmer colleague here to go back home and tell our story and maybe have more U.S. farm organizations join this conversation because it's so critical to be here. I think just to wrap it all up, from the regenerative ag opportunity, choices matter to U.S. farmers. The research results that are in progress now will be critical. But yeah, we just need to be here at the table, be part of the conversation, and we appreciate. And I've seen, this is my third COP, and I'm hearing it over and over. Agriculture, we're getting a little more voice, and I just hope they're listening and they do, think of all the food chain that needs to be provided. And don't set that back through regulation in the future. So
thank you,
very excited.
Thank you. Really appreciate all the inputs. It was such a rich discussion. I lost track of time and we were over time, sorry. But thanks for AICA for not kicking us out and allowing us to continue the discussion. I just want to give my little summary. Like, I heard different things like profitability, participation, delivery on existing commitments, proactive engagement with the government. So I hope we can, as a community, come behind some of these terms and move forward. I want to thank Bayer and ICA for hosting this session and inviting me. And last round of applause for the panelists. And now there's an announcement for Margaret.
Hello, everybody. We ask you just to stay. We ask the panelists to stay. We have something we wanted to share with you all. I have a quick announcement from Domenico, who's here, one of our great partners. There's, in the interest of saving time, we want him to be able to make a quick announcement about this slide. And take it away, Domenico.
Thank you very much, Margaret, and thank you very much to all of you, and especially to ICA that give us the opportunity today to officially announce our official event for 10 years of Decade of Action. I briefly introduce myself. I'm Domenico Vito. I'm the focal point for Italy of Global Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network. We are a network that is spread in Europe, in Africa, and in Latin America also, and we want to foster climate smart agriculture, especially working with young farmers. We have several activities, especially on capacity building, on innovation. We run a virtual academy and also an agri-hackathon initiative to foster innovation in young agriculture regarding sustainable and we can say feasible practice in agriculture. Today we are very glad because we are active now since 10 years, since our ED, Nyokan Dimine, that unfortunately he cannot be here with us, but we can say he demanded us that we are here, the delegation, to announce the event, to invite you next September in Senegal to attend our official event of 10 years of activity. We, with ICA, we are like strong partner, and we are believing that fostering sustainable agriculture, especially in young generation, is the future, is the key to really implement climate action in agriculture. Here there is also my colleague Tigis from Ethiopia that just arrived. Thank you very much. And really, we really hope that we can see you together in Senegal. We will send all the details also to the ICA, and so the ICA can forward more about this event. But we were thinking that was important today in COP29, when the negotiations are still going on, also regarding the Sharm el-Sheikh World Program, was important to see that the young farmers are there. Young farmers are active since like at least 10 years to implement sustainable practice, and for us it's a big honor and pleasure to have this possibility. And thank you again, ICA, for this great opportunity. Thank you very much.